Hello, welcome everyone to the Pacific Roundtable focused on blockchain technology. The title of this roundtable is Born in the Pacific, Blockchain Evidence with Global Relevance. And this will be a roundtable in two parts. I'm your moderator, Sandra Wantege-Hart. I work for Emerging Impact as the CEO of Advisory Services there. And today what we'll be looking at is, the nuances and the differences of the Pacific region and the way that that has colored the engagement by governments, key stakeholders, and charities has evolved over time. And also to highlight a bit, some of the notable differences of the Pacific region and how this is reflected in the work around blockchain. So despite being very different from other regions being extremely large, with thousands of islands spread across the Pacific Ocean. And despite us not hearing much about the Pacific in the global media, it's also host to a number of blockchain initiatives, including one led by Oxfam, as the largest locally grown blockchain use case in the region. The region's complex geography is very reflective of the distributed nature of blockchain itself. And there is a collective and regional identity that sits at the core of all of these efforts. So in both of the sessions today, we'll be asking how, where, and for what purpose can emerging technologies like blockchain really meet culture, tradition, and context on the ground. So we'll be kicking off with a first panel filled by cross-country Pacific and Caribbean experts and innovators to start. And in the second panel, which will begin at the second hour, we'll be diving in deep at the country level to explore an award-winning initiative by Oxfam called the Unblocked Cash Project. All right, so to kick off the first panel discussion, I'd like to invite the panelists up to the stage. We have a great mix of private sector and public sector. We've got Ken Katafuno, who is the founder and lead of Traceable Solutions, which is a Fijian-grown startup. We also have Rhonda Eldridge calling in from the Caribbean to really give us the cross-regional island flavor. She's the head of Harness All Possibilities and is probably best known for her work on the Bahamas Blockchain Business School, which also opens up to other Caribbean islanders. We've got Rajeli Taylor representing the Itokai Land Trust Board at the government of Fiji. And also from the public sector, we've got Elizabeth Genya, who is the Assistant Governor of Guinea, which is the central bank of Papua New Guinea. So welcome to all of the panelists. What we'll start with here is that each speaker will give a quick summary before responding to your question of, what is your work in the blockchain region? Why did you do it and how? And, what do you feel helped you achieve it, at this point in time? And then we'll start with a round of questions. So just as those self-made intros, we'll start with Ken. Can you give us, in a minute or two, an intro to Traceable, please?
Thanks, Sandra, and Bolavnak, everyone. Ken from Traceable. I've been involved in the blockchain space for 4 years now through our company Traceable Solutions. We started about 4 years ago, and I also do a fair amount of consulting around the Pacific Islands. Have 15 years of experience building solutions, tech solutions around the Pacific. We started working on a project with Consensus and the WWF here in Fiji on tuna traceability. And so that's when we got introduced to some of the tools that Consensus was building. Along the way, we decided to pivot, largely because, we didn't see that type of tech being affordable to a lot of the small companies here. I upskilled in blockchain tech, became a developer, and we built our own integrations into the Ethereum network. And we offer that as a service to our traceability business. I've also done a fair amount of advocacy work relating in the Pacific, spoken about it and its applications in fisheries in particular at many conferences, and written some studies up for the FAO on that as well. So looking forward to this event, and great to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken. For the audience, I do like to refer to Ken as the OG of blockchain in the Pacific, because he's been in this space for a long time, relatively speaking. Elizabeth, from the Bank of PNG, can we move to you? Just a quick intro of what you do and your interactions with blockchain so far. A minute or two only, please. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. It's an honor to be on this panel, and I thank you for the invite. Now, for the Bank of Papua New Guinea, it was more of a journey, and it actually started in 2016, where we looked at the time, it was a buzzword, and as part of our financial inclusion strategy, to look at how we could enhance financial inclusion. And so we decided to investigate into the use of digital blockchain, basically as a tool. How we did it? Well, our research, as a regulator, we wanted to understand the tool and how it worked. So our research basically included attending hackathons and blockchain week in London in 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. And after having attended the hackathon and the blockchain week, we came back to the country in Papua New Guinea in 2017. We sponsored the first ever DLT conference, and we had over 240 attendees. This also resulted in the funding of a free blockchain development training, because at the time, the skill set was probably very minimal or zero. As a result of that development training, we trained over 20 participants. We had expertise coming out of Canada, willingly to come and to pay for it and accommodation. We also had the technical assistance help from DFAT, ADB, and obviously Bank of PNG championing this research. I'm pleased to say digital identity, which was field tested in various parts of the country. Unfortunately, due to COVID, everything's now put on hold. But as soon as everything returns to normal, we'll be rolling that out. Also coming out of our research, we realized that, in order to we launched, the governor of Bank of Papua New Guinea launched the first regulatory sandbox in the country. And this sandbox is really a safe place for people out there who've got their products, which is really almost ready to go to the market, to come and actually test it in. So that's basically into the blockchain technology. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, AG Jenya. Rejeli, also representing government from the Fijian side, working more in land heritage, ownership, rights, and titling. Do you want to tell us a bit about your work in the blockchain space? A bit tight, you'll have more time later to expand on it.
Thank you, Sandra, and Bula Vinaka to everybody. Yes, it's a privilege to be on this very prestigious summit and to share a bit about TLTB in this case. For TLTB, like you mentioned, we're actually a statutory organization that looks after 91% of land in Fiji. Our role is actually to lease out land on behalf of the landowners. So why did we do this project? For TLTB, the digitalization transformation aspect in terms of strategy has been ongoing from way back 10 years ago. At this time, I think, like all islands within the Pacific, I think land management within the Pacific is is an issue on its own. And the processes of ensuring the ease of business with regards to leasing process is also an area which has been ongoing in terms of trying to provide the best services. So with regards to that, we had to look for a way in terms of providing excellent service in the land management sphere. And the other aspect is that for Fiji, with regards to land tenure, we have a very unique system in terms of managing land, in terms of managing Itoke land, in terms with regards to the indigenous land ownership. So how did we do this? I think our journey started from 2017 when ADB, through the development partners with the government, actually came in, brought in a program which was called the Future Cities Program in Asia and the Pacific, where a technical assistance was actually put in place. TLTB was fortunate enough to be able to be identified by ADB to come in and help the organization put together a digital land price index as well as a digital land register in terms of trying to address our 47,000 leases. So our journey's been ongoing from 2017, where they came in to do a scoping exercise. We actually did a pilot project for one of the regions within the Greater Suva area in terms of trying to identify a particular area. And as of now, we are now currently putting together a platform to help our leaders be on a digital platform based on a blockchain concept. As of now, we're currently trying to tie up the loose ends, and hopefully we will be able to launch this new product come month as well. So our partners in this case, we were very fortunate to have ADB come on board to help in our technical assistance, and also our consultancy partners, which helped us in terms of the technical aspects of the platform, which is KPMG Singapore and KPMG, the Digital Village, in that aspect. So, so we're really looking forward to the outcome with regards to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rejali. So two very different perspectives from government, between the regulator, on the question of land rights. Rhonda, you are representing the Caribbean region in this case. I know you've done great work in terms of youth and digital inclusion.
Wow, I am just humbled by what you guys have shared. So experience has been very different. I actually came into blockchain through the corporate world or enterprise world, working with the first RegTech blockchain startup in the world, actually, a company out of Ireland. And so that was 2016. I started working with them. And around that time, I founded a nonprofit called Harness All Possibilities, really working with persons displaced as a result of this technology or any technology. So in 2017, I started doing events where I live, at libraries. We started to see a lot of people coming from universities traveling for 2 hours to be at a 7 a.m. event. And in some cases, when we did evening events, people were sitting on the floor. That's just how crowded our events were. And so 2017, I started doing these events to really educate people about emerging technologies, and also educating myself by bringing these persons to the table. And started doing them in the Bahamas. So I did an event near where I live at the library. And then a week later, I did an event in the Bahamas, and we invited orphans to the event, and older persons who were really navigating, what are they going to do with their lives? So we did a ton of events in 2017. 2018, during this time, because I'm coming out of the RegTech space, I started speaking with the governor of the central bank, John Rule. Some of you may or may not have heard of him, and the Sand Dollar. And John and I have known each other for 20 some years. And I said, look, this is happening. This is happening. This is not some sort of person with a hoodie, and it's not the dark web. This is literally something with a lot of value because I'm doing it in the reg tech space. So he asked me, and I remember the date, January the 2nd, we were sitting at Starbucks having coffee of 2018. And he asked, can you help me put together a summit for the central bank to invite all of the industry stakeholders? And in 6 weeks, we did that. And so that, was followed in 2018 by another event by the Office of the Prime Minister in the Bahamas. And I organized, I would say, about 99% of the presenters who came from abroad to that event. And that was followed in 2019 by a youth event, because I figured that the space for adults, no offense to us as adults, the space for adults, very crowded. Where I found there was a need was those persons who would not and did not know anything about this technology. And what happens, I've seen, and I've seen this in corporate, we tend to go with, oh, let's build it and they will come. Well, they can't keep buying and being part of building the value for something unless we educate them. So I was very passionate about that. So we did it in August, and we were told nobody's going to come to this event in August. Kids are getting ready for school. And I remember this remark. People are at their summer homes that time of year. And I'm like, really? Not the people we're going to invite to this event. And the wonderful thing about this event is we got the first, we didn't have any money. And the first donation we got was from an organization I'm a part of called Help for Children. And we focus on children who were abused and neglected. And I asked one of the persons on the board if he would help me fund this. And he said, I will do it. I'll give you money, but you go and you get abused and neglected kids. And so we went to the orphanage and we got 4 kids and they were the first kids. And believe it or not, we started with zero knowledge. They had no devices. We worked in Starbucks. We found a mentor. We met in Starbucks. We gave them devices and we used devices. People just shared their devices. Those kids,
I'm just
online learning, and they won the busy competition.
Yeah, the work with youth that you've done is amazing. I'm going to circle right back to you, but we're super tight on time, so I'm going to go into the questions now. I've got a first question for Ken, and this is really about the relevance of the technology in the region. So, in your experience working in this space, what do you think is unique to the Pacific region that makes blockchain and similar emerging technologies of relevance, especially now, post-pandemic, climate change, right on the front lines? What do you feel in your work has made this blockchain best suited to achieve the goals that you look at Traceable?
Thanks, Sandra. So I guess generally, across the Pacific, we kind of need the disruption in certain sectors. Financial services and what else? Again, small island countries, geographically spread, a lot of small populations, kind of difficult to scale any type of emerging tech and have it sustainably run in these types of environments. So we spend a lot of time doing that, thinking about that and trying to innovate through the work that we do in agriculture and fisheries. I think it's also, not too heavily regulated in the Pacific, maybe good for pilots, to test ideas and things, to easily run projects. I think, the Pacific has a desire for, better utilization of their natural resources and to earn, greater revenue from that. So technologies like blockchain, could potentially, provide promising avenues to be able to do that. I think we're also seeing, greater internet connectivity across the islands, greater connectivity to the world. Prices are slowly dropping for internet access and data packages. So, that's also, driving a lot of the the tech adoption, and the thinking in this space. And I think we have a lot of young people that would be great to get involved in this space. So I'll just start off with that. Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Ken. Yeah, at least for me and what I've seen across everybody is that these digital channels are giving us access to a capacity to build infrastructure in a way that we currently can't, with that bricks and mortar and hard infrastructure legacy approach, just because the nature of geography. So for our second question, I'll be circling over to our government representatives. We'll start with you, Rejeli. And this is a question around the context. So we hear over and over again that the pace of development in the Pacific is behind, but honestly, it's just on a different pathway. But part of the speed of development across that pathway really does depend on government adoption. So, from your perspective at TLTB, what do you see as the role for Pacific Island governments and policymakers in accelerating the adoption and the building of this type of infrastructure? We'll start with you, Rejeli, and when you're done, we'll move over to Rejeli, over to you. Perhaps we'll pass over to Elizabeth, if you can unmute, and then we'll move back over to Rejeli. Her screen is frozen. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. Well, the fact that many of our Pacific nations, as already mentioned, are small and it crosses a lot of boundaries, makes it very difficult. We're still relatively young in terms of world history, and in particular banking history and our place in the global community. So economically is relatively new for us. So if we're not as influenced by other countries in this way, it makes it it's very flexible in new concepts. And unlike the more developed countries, they've inherited relatively very sophisticated systems over the years. So when I look at trying to compare, it makes it, they've got a lot of history of unlearning to do, whereas in the South Pacific, and I don't speak for everyone, but from a PNG perspective, we don't have to unlearn a lot of things. So for the Bank of Papua New Guinea, when we looked at what's uniqueness and issues around blockchain, we realized from the outset that we don't have the right legislations. There is some rules around privacy, jurisdiction, sovereignty that needs to be carefully looked at. And so when we looked at blockchain, we see the opportunity of that opportunity to actually help us come up with some framework our people's interest, especially when it comes to land titles, formalizing records. So, yeah, I'd say and I'm repeating myself, it's for the Pacific countries, we've got a lot of learning to do. And we look at what are the lessons that we can learn from them?
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. If you don't mind, because we've lost Rejeli, one of the purposes of this panel was really to inspire and invigorate other policymakers across the Pacific. And I've noticed in our conversations with the Bank of PNG that you guys are really on the cutting edge, and I really see you as a regulator who's not afraid, to step into this space. So what do you think, what would be the advice that you'd give other regulators in the region that may be a bit wary about blockchain technology?
Okay, like as I said, our journey was more of a research. We're not into the business of wanting to become blockchain experts. We saw the opportunity to learn about this new technology. Time when it was started around 2016, we saw a growing interest by the international banks, the mobile network operators, and even non-bank institutions wanting to look at existing products and services and making that available to the customers. So as a regulator from the outset, we thought, all right, let's get into this and see what we can do to protect customers, understand the technology. So we, right from the beginning, as a see how we could enhance our financial inclusion. And we also realized that identity was the key. And having attended the blockchain week in London and hackathons, we actually had one or two inventors coming up with a solution, that an ID solution that will help Papua New Guineans. And we made sure that ID must work in Papua New Guinea where we don't have internet, and it must operate in a very remote part of the country. So we did come up with an ID solution in 2016, but over the years, over the next developed one, it was able to address few. And 2018, we ventures out of Europe, we developed a digital access tool, which is DAT. And as I said, it was successfully tested in 4 parts of the country. And we were about to roll it out when COVID hit us. So it's really about the regulator wanting to know how to regulate this particular technology as it gets sort of implemented in the country.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And some of the key takeaways that I hear are, if you're not sure, just try. You don't need to be an expert. You can bring in access. We all have access to these experts, and as far as regulation goes, if you don't do it, you can't regulate it. And again, there are heaps of experts coming from other regions globally that we can draw down on. Jelly, really happy to see you rejoin us. If you don't mind giving us your take in terms of the role of government in accelerating innovation in the region, in your experience, and any advice you'd have to inspire other policymakers across the Pacific to engage.
Thank you, Sandra. And I'm sorry I dropped off a bit there. But yes, I think it's a very good question in terms of making things happen. First of all, from giving the experience from TLTB in this case, the first thing is political will. At the national level, I think if the strategy is there for the government to be able to take on projects such as blockchain or new digital transformation, that actually helps very much. So from the government perspective, the strategy is to put in place national development plans aligned to digital transformation within the country is very important. The second bit to that is also getting all the parties involved. I think the partnership programs has very much helped in this. Having those bilateral partnerships with major countries, with organizations such as ADB and UNDP, who are drivers of these digital platforms. are also very important, because when we're looking at island countries such as Fiji in this case, or any other Pacific Island countries, digital transformation projects can be very, very costly. So from the onset, having that partnership is very much important. The other aspect of it is coming from the organizations such as ours, we need the leaders within the organization to drive these projects itself. The leaders in terms of the strategic plans that are actually put in place from the respective organizations. So to have these policies in place and have them as projects, to be able to drive some of these projects that are very important to the economic sustainability of countries is very much important in this aspect. The other aspect as well is for government, the collaboration between partners, collaboration between departments, and collaboration between organizations and the customers as well. Because for many of the projects, what government puts in place is actually to help its people. So we need the collaboration from both from the national, the local, and the community to be able to bring all these things together and make it a reality. For example, from TLTB, our core role is to look after our landowners. And it was very, very important in this aspect to bring the landowners onto the platform to understand the journey that the organization is going through. So being inclusive in the projects that you put out is very, very important as well. Understanding the product at the end of the day of what is going to be rolled out and who it is going to be rolled out for is also very important in this aspect. But to make it work, I think the other aspect that, say, for example, for Fiji, we need the people in terms of the professional aspect. Say, for example, Kenneth is one such area in terms of the blockchain concept in this aspect. For Fiji itself, I think we're just going into that space, but to have people that are well-versed in this field, having the right capacity building, the trainings that will ensure that the projects that are put in place are sustainable in the long term, but also having that backup from our partners in the long term is also very important, especially when we are looking at new areas such as digital transformation, or in terms of the blockchain itself, the concept of the blockchain. So in this area, the other areas in terms of financial assistance. For it to happen, we need to have the infrastructure in place. And rightfully said by Kenneth, for island countries like us, where we are sparsely located, we need the connectivity to make such things work. So we need government to come in and drive that that area with regards to ensuring the infrastructure in place. And at the end of the day, having the governance aspect in terms of setting up the policies, setting up the regulations, and setting up future areas where it could help in terms of the national development of the country as a whole.
Thank you,
Sandra.
Thanks so much, Rajeli. It's so interesting what you say about partnership and connectivity, that in the same way we really are in an age where we need these digital channels to reach across the islands, but that we also need partnerships to reach across the region so that we can share this expertise and learn from each other and support each other. So my next question here is really trying to get down to the human and practical level, which Rajeli, you also highlighted. And this question is for Rhonda from HAP, and particularly around the Blockchain Business School. I have been in awe at how you have been able to convene young people from across the Caribbean islands to really kickstart the pace of interest and capacity and engagement in blockchain, but we know that people are complicated. Like you said, sometimes you need some extra steps to make sure they engage. So what's the human impact that you've seen in your work, and what are some of the key challenges that you feel in island contexts across regions are coming out as you convene everyone?
Thank you, Sandra. I think key for me as I started this process, like I said, going to the orphanage and really introducing a concept to people who did not know what it is. Now, when we have a concept of something, I think Elizabeth talked about unlearning. That's really hard, particularly at the government level. They're like, what? And they try to find all the things to say, oh, this isn't going to work. Whereas if you go to the kids, and we, at our first event, the youngest child was 5. And he wasn't even supposed to stay at the event. And I asked him if he had anything else to do that day. It's summertime. He says, no. I said, okay, well, why don't you stay? You'll learn. And that young man for 3 days, 5-year-old, he sat there, he participated in events that were interactive. And what we did was we found that there are a couple things when you start to talk to people, you meet them where they are. You're not there to judge them at their level of intelligence and whether they know it or not. We don't use jargon that they don't understand. So you keep it simple. What is blockchain? And if you explain smart contracts like you would explain a vending machine, oh, really? That's all it is? So we found that keeping it simple, keeping it short, we had educators chime in. You're talking to people about a concept they don't understand. So you have to keep it simple. And with the kids, we kept it 20 minutes. If we do any presentation, we know after 20 minutes, we lose them because we lose adults after 5, but kids will hang on. Okay, this sounds great. So the challenges we found, however, were that particularly when it came to islands, like, the Bahamas, or even when we did this event in 2020 during COVID. COVID actually helped us because then we were not limited by borders. We were in a virtual platform. We found that there were a couple things. Infrastructure, I think, Rajali, I think that's the right. You talked about infrastructure. That was extremely important because weak Wi-Fi was an issue. Then if you're talking islands, sometimes it's the device, right? So if you're just doing internet connectivity, that may be simple, but it depends on where you are. The connectivity could be weak. So that was an issue. And during COVID, we also had electricity as an issue because if you can't, you can't get juice for your device, then you have an issue. And we found also that because we were coming at it very unconventionally through the kids and then inviting the adults, where there were people who just didn't think it would work because it wasn't in the education system. It wasn't mandated by the Ministry of Education. And so we had to explain to them our first port of call was the Ministry of Education. And you know what the response was during COVID? We don't know where our kids are. We don't even know how to connect with our kids. And the year before, the challenge was the teachers had never heard of blockchain at that point. So we had to literally keep peeling away to get to a place where, okay, they don't understand anything, so they're on the same level as the kids. And so we invited them to come in as mentors. We started using this concept of community. You learn, and we'll keep it simple for you. And as simple as we're sharing it or explaining it to you, then we want you to explain it to the kids. And so those persons came on as mentors. PricewaterhouseCoopers came on and talked about data. So we wanted to make sure in terms of regulations and GDPR that we were doing the right things, protecting the children and also protecting the identity of persons that we worked with. So Sandra, when you asked me about this yesterday, I sort of grappled with it because there were so many challenges. And you know what? We just let go of the challenges and said, let's just run with it. Let's just let it go, see where it goes. And it really just turned out as it should have without us forcing it. You know how people tend to force it. People were eager to learn. And they were eager to find what is the opportunity here for me, because they realized it was decentralized, it was distributed, and it was meant for people to be able to do peer-to-peer in its original form. So I could give you a ton of different examples, but I would say those are the challenges: meeting people where they are, the data connectivity, the concept of blockchain. They don't want to know anything about cryptography. Don't even mention that word, because they don't know what it means. We kept it very, very simple for that 5-year-old who came the first day and stayed 3 days.
I would love to know where he is now. Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Oh, he went home and told his dad he needed a computer. He went home and said, Dad, I need a computer. Yeah. And his dad bought him a computer, and he has participated every year.
Great. Thanks so much, Rhonda. Yeah, I think a lot of people are inspired with that story. And, this brings up a few really interesting points that we'll use in the wrap-up question that I'll hand over to everyone, which are really around the fact that as island regions and nations, and even as nations that have been colonized, we do know that if we are not ahead of a new trend, industrially in particular, and if we do not begin to learn about what is coming, it can be dumped on us, tested on us, or imposed on us. I notice some people are here from Micronesia, and it is absolutely critical that we're all playing a role, especially now with these new digital channels, to make sure that we are giving exposure and access to knowledge so that people have a chance to engage like this 5-year-old and create the demand for more learning, more development, and more solutions that meet them where they are, like you were saying, Rhonda. So I'm going to go around with the last round for all panelists to answer this question. And this is around this people-centered approach that technology, like language, needs to be translated, and it needs to be interpreted by people where they are in their own cultural contexts. But what are some of the key pieces of advice or ideas that you have for the Pacific region and the Caribbean to increase exposure and access to make sure that we as people can stand together and make decisions that will positively impact our peers and our communities before those decisions are made for us by somebody else? Let's start with Ken. Exposure, access, knowledge, and the revolution. What do you have to say?
Thanks, Sandra. So interesting story. I think Elizabeth mentioned the Blockchain Pacific Conference. So I was a speaker there a couple of years ago, and I recall there was a comment from the audience. A gentleman talked about how he was relating blockchain technology to the mark of the beast. And that was quite interesting, because I think it just there's a great need for more awareness and education in this space. A lot of people that we work with or who are interested in this space don't have a lot of knowledge about what blockchain technology. There's a lot of hype around it, and so it's important to, in my view, that we become familiar with it, but also help policymakers, educate themselves around it, which is kind of what we try to do. I think it's important to build communities of practice. We have a blockchain community group on Facebook, Fiji Blockchain Community, that we've been running for almost 4 years now, and we have a lot of Pacific Islanders there. We use it to share information and share what's happening around the world in blockchain, and to talk about it. I also, try to give presentations at universities to students that are studying technology, just to see, maybe someone would be interested in it. And there's a colleague of mine in our company. He heard me speak in his final year of uni, and he was the second certified blockchain developer in Fiji, and he works for us now. So slowly influencing people, I think, is important. Educating them of the good experiences with blockchain, but also the bad experiences. And there've been many around the world. So from our perspective as a tech company, we're always trying to look at how we can take, this great technology, but, apply it within our environment, within our context, and try to make it work from a sustainability perspective, not just introducing something new and as a fad and then, just letting it die away. Yeah, thanks a lot, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Ken. These of practice, and again, using other digital media like social media to create those communities of practice, especially now when it's quite difficult to travel. So I'll move over to Rejeli for the same question. Rejeli, from your perspective, coming from government, what role and what can government do to really increase exposure and learning so that citizens are able to engage in an informed way and in a contextualized way as we go forward, so that we are not subject to somebody else's interpretation of what is good for us? Go ahead.
Thanks, Sandra. I just want to say, we're living in a global economy now. And whether you're up in the Caribbean or down here in Fiji, or in any other parts of the world, we all need to be connected. So from the government perspective, I think, this is where the digital transformation really is going, and we need to embrace that as governments, as people, as communities. We need to embrace the digital transformation that is happening around the world, and all the more reason given our current situation now in terms of the COVID-19 experience. We've seen that here in Fiji, a lot of the businesses are actually going through this digital transformation to carry out their businesses. A lot of the communities are now wanting connections through digital payments to receive funds through the banks, whether they're here on the mainland or out in the islands. Also in terms of connectivity, where there is isolation and border lockdowns. So the digital transformation we see is here to stay and needs to be embraced by all aspects of government and all aspects of the organization we're in. But the other aspect of it is ensuring the sustainability of these digital platforms to ensure that it meets all the criteria of any community or any government requirements. The other aspect of it is that the integration and the collaboration of ensuring that the digital platforms actually connect us to one another. So from my end, I think with regards to where government stands, government has a very important role to ensure that these strategies are put in place. Also in terms of ensuring that people are connected through every means possible if the infrastructure is there. So commitment from government in every aspect is quite important. The other area is, because we're a small island developing states, the issue of natural disasters. This has become a very important aspect in terms of strategically planning sustainable measures for every aspect of the sector within government as well. How do we ensure the sustainability in terms of resilience with regards to climate change? How do we ensure that we get people on land away from sea level rises? How do we get data out to them? So for me, I think digital technology is a facilitator to ensure that our communities keep updated, are assured of the livability aspect in terms of the communities they live in. But at the same time, also giving them that assurance that they know what is happening around them. And the collaboration that this will bring into the picture is very important. So at the end of the day, I think for this to happen, the public-private partnerships is very important to drive this. And government cannot do it alone. It needs all aspects of the community to come in and partner with it to make things work. From me, I think that's where government is very much involved. It needs to look after its people, but also to ensure that the people are involved from phase 1 to the end phase in terms of ensuring that whatever is put in place is actually achieved at the end of the day.
Thanks, Rajeli. A lot of really great points there in terms of, education and making sure communities are informed, but also involved. And in the next session, we'll be speaking about the frequency of natural disasters, community inclusion, and also the nature of community engagement that you can get in small island states, where communities are much more closely knit and therefore can be much quicker to adopt new solutions if they're included from the beginning. Elizabeth, I'll circle over to you, coming from PNG, one of the most diverse and complex countries in the entire world. How do you see this increase in exposure and access in order to make sure that citizens are able to engage in an informed way going forward?
Thanks, Sandra. The question is really what has been done, over the years since we took interest in that research. And for us, we've been working on this issue since 2016 in the context of financial inclusion. And in so governments, both provincial and at national level, we keep them in the loop. We publicize a lot of our achievements. Our participation at international where we attract positive media attention. We also work to the financial service providers, and we focus on financial education and building financial knowledge. So all of these culminating in the national government's declaring a financial inclusion as a national strategy. And that led to the establishment of a dedicated agency called CEFI, the Center for Excellence in Financial Inclusion, who have now taken on a role of developing and implementing that financial inclusion strategy. The bank's commitment also to innovation has resulted in the creation and patronage Digital Commerce Association. It's a legally constituted entity designed innovation, whilst at the same time supporting Bank of Papua New Guinea's drive for financial inclusion. So we believe fintech solutions are the key to financial inclusion in Papua New Guinea. So it is actually through a lot of awareness that we see awareness building activities that we are now seeing that decisions makers at all levels in the government, the financial institutions collaborate with the commercial banks, also other professional bodies in the community. We believe are in a much better position now in understanding the technology and make informed decisions. Thank you.
So much, Elizabeth. Definitely there's that flow, right? That when you increase awareness, you increase exposure, you're also increasing familiarity in a way that makes it less intimidating to engage. So we're running a bit on time. So Rhonda, for you, I'm actually going to pick up, just because you've spoken so much around like access and exposure for youth, I'm going to pick up one of these questions from the chat that I know you did cover in the Blockchain Business School recently.
Oh, wow.
And this is, how do we ensure that there is enough understanding of the technology in order to identify where its more dubious applications are and how to differentiate between scams and legitimate solutions that can help countries move forward. You want to say a few words?
I could say many words, but I will say that when you see it, you call it out. You call it for what it is, no matter how dressed up it is or how. Today I saw one where someone was saying, oh, get rich by investing in these altcoins. And I'm like, two words that should not be together. One is buy, that's advice, and get rich. And that is a fantasy. And that is the hype we have seen in this industry. And it has not benefited the masses because they blindly go into something like my cousin. My uncle died this year. She said, oh, everyone said, go into blockchain, into crypto. She took all of his inheritance, the money, and put it into a scam and lost everything. She did not know what she didn't know. And that's why I think we all have to build the trust in this technology that we want to experience. And that means that we all are, I think that Elizabeth said it, we all are called to action. We can't sit on the sidelines like it's a movie. It's not a movie. This is real. And we have to make it, give it meaning for people that they do call it out. If it doesn't smell right, doesn't taste right, doesn't seem right, it's a scam. And we know it, but we tend to think, oh, I want to get rich. So I think that be vigilant. And I would say this is where the soft skills come in. You know, we all have them. So just really have that conversation and build the trust that we want in the industry. We can do it. I truly believe it. And that's how Sandra and I met, by the way. Complete strangers.
That's totally right. But again, you know, you can only differentiate legitimacy from nefarious behavior if you understand what a legitimate, helpful, and trustworthy solution looks like. You know, so Rhonda, I think what you were saying also pertains to what Ken was saying about communities of practice, of being connected in a way that's engaging enough for people to be able to filter, you know, and to listen to each other and have enough information to be able to differentiate. Unfortunately, we are right up at the end of time with only 1 minute left. So we will not be able to do any more audience questions. I know there's a lot of interest in practical applications, but of course we've got Ken on value and supply chains in agriculture and fisheries. We've got Rejeli on land rights, you know, and government records. We've got a regulator on the panel in the form of Elizabeth, in terms of looking at financial inclusion. Rhonda is looking at education, particularly for youth. And I, of course, am focused on the delivery of payments in natural disasters. So if you want to hear about the practical use case, please tune in to the next panel. We'll be going to tables currently just to take a break for everybody. And then we'll be moving into the panel on Vanuatu and the Unblocked Cash project, now delivering disaster assistance to over 20,000 people in Vanuatu, with around 10,000 more beyond. So please tune in. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll go to the tables for a quick break, and then we will reconvene in the presentation room. Thanks so much to our panelists. Take care. Hope you listen in on the next session. Pearls of wisdom, guys. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're now in our second panel, which is going to be the very practical deep dive into the Pacific region's largest blockchain use case. So much as this panel is sponsored by Oxfam, we'll be talking today about the Unblocked Cash project, which is a blockchain-powered digital payment delivery system to assist people in the wake of natural disasters and economic instability and the impacts of COVID. So this is a project that was born and bred in Vanuatu, but has now expanded out. And we'll be joined by our panelists, shortly after a brief presentation of what unblocked cash is. But just to let you know, joining us today, we do have Hana Tamata, who is the humanitarian coordinator at Oxfam in Vanuatu, who is eyeballs deep in the project as we speak, as they're wrapping up scaled implementation. We also have Nikki Barnes from the Vanuatu Business Resilience Council, who was instrumental in building the local vendor network to allow people to spend their digital cash after a crisis. And we also have Kendra De Rousseau, the country director of World Vision, the largest implementing partner on 2 of the 13 islands that the project has been spread across in Vanuatu. And of course, we have Tristan Cole, who works for Sempo, which is the blockchain startup that built the software to make unblocked cash possible. So for the next 15 minutes, before we give the panelists the stage, I'm just going to give you an overview of the Unblocked Cash project. I did create and lead the project while I was at Oxfam before moving over to Emerging Impact, where I am but a partner of Oxfam's in the project right now. So let me talk you through it so that everybody has a minimum level of information before we engage, and then we'll hear from the partners and the implementers. Okay, so born in the Pacific, just like the title of this panel, I just want to do a quick tech check to make sure everybody can see this. Yep, hoping everybody can see my screen being shared. Great, I see some thumbs up from the crowd. This is the Unblocked Cash project. So this was a project that was specifically created to expand and accelerate the delivery of humanitarian assistance in Vanuatu, which is one of the world's most disaster-prone countries globally, and which is also a nation of 83 islands, so logistically very complex. At the same time, we wanted to weave in digital financial inclusion to make sure that the delivery of payments was giving people choice to spend and pay for what they needed, when they needed, after the natural disaster in 2021. So why was the Unblocked Cash project created in 2018? And this was drawing on experience from the humanitarian sector, where it's been found that payments, because they confer dignity and they support the economy, are a highly effective way to respond to disasters. But for those of us on the islands that know what it's like to be somewhere without an ATM, it requires financial services infrastructure that reaches everyone. And in the case of Vanuatu, we just were not there with the experience of using checks to deliver payments. For example, we found that financial services were very expensive, didn't reach enough people, not financially inclusive, and of course paper-based, which increases complexity and increases that time of delivery when people really need assistance as soon as possible. So those capacity and cost barriers were a major constraint in terms of being able to deliver in this way. And of course, delivering goods logistically is just as complex, heavy, and costly. So we looked to leveraging technology, to find a blockchain solution that fit this problem, knowing that blockchain technology itself, its most widely adopted uses are in the form of cross-border and person-to-person payments. So that's why we picked up on blockchain. And the thinking behind the project was, why should we deliver stuff? Island communities have very vibrant economies. We should be engaging those economies. People transact all the time before, during, and after natural disasters. So why not enable them to do so in a way that enhances recovery? And finally, going back to financial services infrastructure, connectivity reaches where banks don't reach. So why not leverage that in a way that could accelerate this assistance delivery process? So in 2019, we chose to pilot the technology. Oxfam partnered with Sempo, and you'll hear from Tristan later representing them. with the goals of using technology to make these payments faster, cheaper, more transparent. So the issue of aid transparency is very real, and easier to deliver not just for Oxfam, but for all humanitarian partners in Vanuatu, acknowledging that everyone was struggling with the same contextual issues. And the frequency of disasters meant that we simply do not have the luxury anymore to make people wait, in some cases up to 4 weeks, for assistance that may just be in the form of a tarp, a bucket, and a bag of rice. Having done that pilot, it was hugely successful. You can see some of the stats here. So registering people and receiving assistance happened at the same time within minutes. Satisfaction increased because of that dignity, choice, and the safety of receiving money using a card-based system, much cheaper than the current financial system and definitely faster than current modes of delivery. And what we learned in the pilot, by working with 2 communities, 1,200 people across the peri-urban areas of Port Vila in the capital, were that when you co-build locally in and with the communities that you are assisting, that works because it seeds adoption and creates familiarity and engagement. Secondly, informal networks and markets accelerate results because people already know each other. So it's almost like these are railways of trust, that you're really just providing a vehicle for. And finally, going back to trust, you do need that trust between the organization and the community, and between members of the community and their local business people. And you need that more than you need experts. In terms of how it worked, a lot of people ask practically, but this blockchain thing, what happened? We looked at the way people behave, and we provided smartphones and cards. So that is the whole infrastructure. Tap the card against the phone to make a payment, issue the card using a smartphone or which allows you to be in the community when you're doing that. People could go shopping immediately after receiving a card, and then go to their local vendor to pay. And those vendors, because the system was automatically reconciling balances, could be paid out weekly by Oxfam, resulting in cash flow in that local market. And lastly, Oxfam's staff had a dashboard where we could register people and track how funds were being used across those community markets. So understanding impact in real time between who, where, and what types of goods were being purchased to help that recovery process, to know whether it was food, hygiene, and the great thing to confirm was that people spent their money to meet essential needs primarily. Now, that pilot happened in 2019, and of course, none of us knew what was coming in 2020. And so in 2020, unfortunately for Vanuatu, in addition to COVID-19 and lockdowns happening in April, we also had a Category 5 cyclone called TC Harold hit Vanuatu and devastate the north of the country. An ongoing and worsening volcanic eruption in the south of the country, and as we know, across all island regions, the job loss and business closure from tourism industries being affected was creating needs as well. So triple crises resulted in the decision to pull together humanitarian partners in Vanuatu and move directly to scale the initiative. So with one payment platform and 19 partners, we assisted communities across the north, middle, and south of the country for 6 months. Over 350 vendors were enrolled, and over $2.4 million and spent by people in these local markets. There are some numbers here, which of course can be accessible on the Island Innovations website after this, but the bottom line, 20,500 people reached, 124,000 plus digital cash transactions. And you can see in the market, community stores, transportation, including banana boats, taxis, fresh food markets, hardware to rebuild, energy, agriculture, bakeries, butcheries, and even pharmacies were the places where people spent their money. And again, this reconfirmed that Humanitarian agencies and development partners with that community presence can create community inclusion, and if using the right tools, can expand that level of adoption to get impact using a blockchain payment platform. These are some testimonies. So as you can see, we've got a wonderful mama in the market here who just found that with this phone, people came in with their cards and she was just able to sell her goods faster and generate income for her family. And to wrap this up, and we can talk about the details in the questions and the panelists can share their experience. The ultimate result of this now, I think more than 9 months after, in terms of evidence and global relevance, is that this has really shifted the entire paradigm in Vanuatu and beyond. So there is an increase in response capacity and speed for all of the 19 organizations on board. The humanitarian agencies that before could not deliver payments because the infrastructure was too expensive or did not reach far enough now can. A higher percentage of the aid money went direct into economies and people. And there has been a major at the government level, where ultimately this has made blockchain technology real and tangible and highly relevant in a natural disaster prone context. And so that has led to pushes for more adoption, more open legislation and digitization, and across areas like e-commerce, the private sector. Digital literacy is now at the front and center. And finally, everybody has seen that digital tools can meet community recovery, and that it's people who power the digital solutions rather than the other way around. In terms of global relevance, this project has won 2 global awards. It has expanded to pilots in Papua New Guinea and Venezuela, soon to reach the Solomon Islands next year. Oxfam is also doing feasibility studies to look at unblocked cash in Southern Africa and 2 countries. And finally, has validated this concept that you can build for the digital last mile using blockchain, and that system may work when the financial services don't, and it will definitely reach where financial services won't. So apologies for such a quick presentation, but I'd like to keep us on time and hear what our panelists have to say. So I will invite all of the panelists up on stage. So that's Kendra from World Vision, Hannah from Oxfam, we've got Nikki from the Vanuatu Business Resilience Council, and Tristan from SEMPO. Welcome, guys. Can we have all of the panelists on stage? I only see you, Nikki, having joined. Can we get Tristan, Kendra? Oh, everybody's there, James is telling us. That's fine. I don't know why I can't see everybody. All right, well, this is just a round of introductions and kind of key takeaways from your own experience in the project. You've been boots on the ground implementing. Let's start with you, Nikki. In your experience, what really happened? What was your role, and how do you think this project has been influential in your area of work and for your organization? Go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you, Sandra. Hi, everyone. So I'm part of the Vanuatu Business Resilience Council. We're a standing committee of the Chamber of Commerce, and we represent the private sector, particularly in times of disaster. So we're made up of private sector businesses. One of the main was really how this was a win-win. Everyone was a little unsure how the private sector would engage in a humanitarian event like this. And what was important and really came out of the project was that the private sector is already there. So when a cyclone strikes, there are already businesses in that community, and those businesses already had a way to move goods into their location. They already had logistic networks. So they were very ready and they immediately engaged and were very happy to be part of the program, and it benefited the program as well as benefiting their businesses. So it was a really good win-win.
Nikki. Let's move over to you, Hannah. So you're right in there with the Unblocked Cash team at Oxfam in Vanuatu. in your view, give us a recap of your experience and what really stands out to you in terms of the impact of this project in Vanuatu. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hi, Sandra. And firstly, I'd like to say I'm very privileged to be on this panel on behalf of the cash transfer program team in Vanuatu. And for me, so my role is cash transfer response manager. And for me, this program has been a journey that started in 2018. And I was in the first stages of the program and later came in the last stages of the program now. And for me, it's been a great journey for the team. It's been a really, really fantastic journey where we have, through this program, we have been able to give the power of decision back to those most vulnerable in a disaster. And we have also seen them having the power to make decisions on how they know that what would be necessary or needed for them as a victim of a disaster. And also the importance part of the program is noticing that it restores dignity to those. We've also, through this program, we've been able to build capacity, strengthen partnership across organizations, which is very important for us as Oxfam. And one very important thing as well as a nation in the Pacific is that through this program, we have also been able to reflect on our identity as a Pacific country, what our identity is, what the culture is, and how cash transfer has actually fit into that culture. How, as a Pacific Islanders, we can take cash transfer and make it our own and have ownership over it. So it's been a really good journey. It's been a journey where we've learned a lot about ourselves as a nation as well, I would say. And I think for us, we're very proud of the journey and how it's been and how it's going forward to now. Yeah, thanks, Sandra.
I note that Sandra's still having some connection issues, so I might just pop in and introduce myself because I think Hannah has set up my introduction well. So my name is Kendra DeRusso, and I'm the country director of World Vision here in Vanuatu. And World Vision was one of Oxfam's main implementing as part of the unblocked cash in 2 of the 3 provinces that it was run. And, we really saw this as an opportunity as a team to work with an organization that had the expertise to set this up and learn some of the skills necessary to take it forward. And as Nikki said, really reach a maximum number of people needing assistance, Tropical Cyclone Harold, and particularly as a result of the economic impacts of COVID-related border closures. So World Vision opened its doors to Oxfam, who didn't have an operation and down south in the country. And we really forged a seamless partnership to be able to implement unblocked cash to islands to a maximum number of individuals. And I think one of my really key takeaways from that was how easy uptake was, not only for the participants and the vendors, but also for my team, and how seamless the adaptation was for them, and how few problems we had to kind of troubleshoot on the ground as we were rolling out. So I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that later. But while we're waiting for Sandra to manage tech issues, I might just continue playing interim host and hand over to you, Tristan, from SEMPO for an introduction.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel and really excited to speak about our experiences from the tech perspective in unblocked cash. So some context: SEMPO is a technology company that works with NGOs and government agencies to help build capacity and run more cash transfer programs. So we build all the technology in-house. We support a couple of different blockchains like Ethereum and the CELO network. And yeah, we're really, we focus on, a human-centered design approach. And for many of the programs, at least pre-COVID, we would actually, fly into the country and work with local teams designing, products that it just varies from context to context. In places like Kenya, text-based payments, USSD payments are very common. Where places like Vanuatu, obviously with the challenges you've got around internet connectivity, you need to design things a little bit differently. And that's why we've got these touch to pay cards that work offline. So yeah, Sempo's the technology organization behind that. And yeah, we're really proud to be involved in Unblocked Cash that is now scaled to Papua New Guinea and also Venezuela, which were both interesting and challenging contexts to be involved in.
Thanks, Tristan. I might pick up on one of the points that you mentioned about the tap cards, and looking at the Q&A from the previous session, Andrew Irvin asked, as an addendum to the question around blockchain and cryptocurrency, how do we ensure the understanding of the technology versus its more dubious applications is differentiated? And I think one of the key points that I wanted to share as a partner implementing an Unblocked Cash is that in my experience, because the system used for Unblocked Cash was a smartphone at the vendor point, and a card with a chip on it that had cash into it in the participant's hand, that differentiation was quite clear, both to vendors and to participants. And from a policy perspective, the Vanuatu felt comfortable with rolling out Unblocked Cash because there was an actual Vatu trust fund in reserve matching the money being put through the system. Tristan, did you want to add anything about that from a technology perspective?
Yeah, sure. I guess one of the challenges with blockchain technology today is it can be quite out of reach for people who are less technical, and it's come a long way since when it was just Bitcoin like 10 years ago. It's now definitely a lot more accessible for people, but when it comes to building applications that work, say, in environments with less internet connectivity, you really have to design it in a new way. And supporting like lower transaction costs as well is a challenge. So I think when you're designing these applications, you have to take all these, I guess, questions in mind, and it just varies context to context. So in the case of Vanuatu, as Kendra mentioned, it's ensuring that these cards work offline, that they you can still transact with vendors even if the internet isn't working, and that the transaction costs are extremely low. So in this case, we were digitizing fiat, in that case the digital Vatu, and this was on Ethereum, but we used a side chain that meant that the transaction costs were really low. And that's obviously important when I think the average transaction cost was, something in the order of like a couple of hundred Vatu. It just wasn't particularly large. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Tristan. Sorry, guys, I had some technical issues. But, just adding on to what I believe you said, first, thanks, Kendra, for stepping in to facilitate. What I think was really amazing is that at a time where nobody could travel to Vanuatu to support this response, it really kick-started this pace of scaling the solution in a way that was truly inclusive. And we really had that buy-in from so many organizations in a way that had the rest of the population of Vanuatu, including the government, wake up to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe this can work for us, And I do think that it's that story around the circumstances that surround innovation and the circumstances that drive scale in times of need that's really unique about this project. But I also hope that it serves as, kind of this practical example that we were hearing in the last session is needed in order to really understand more than just that blockchain hype and get more into the space of how blockchain can help people and how solutions can begin to mimic the environment that they're being created in. So because we didn't have enough time in the last session for audience questions, I'd like to suggest actually that we move into the breakout room with tables. So this is what's going to happen, everyone. Our panelists, you will jump to a table so you're not all at the same table. To discuss the audience, you will need to have your mic and your camera on. Everybody in the audience, you guys will be sitting at the tables, and I'll be popping some discussion questions into the chat for everybody to reply to. To give you a recap of what those discussion questions will be, and really this is your chance to be critical, ask our partners what they really did, what they had trouble with. It's not all, roses and rainbows. Discussion questions will be, and pick whatever is relevant to you, again, available in the chat once you get to the tables. Do you think this type of solution is relevant and feasible in your own country? And if not, why? If yes, why? From the lens of unblocked cash. Second question, what is the role of charitable organizations like World Vision, like Oxfam, and the other partners on the project in stepping forward and being on the front lines, scaling the technology? If you'd like, please speak about the role of the private sector. In the same way, Nikki represents a business council and a business community that is extremely diverse, that we're able to engage with the technology. And lastly, the critical questions, if you like these. Is this just more of hype? Are you skeptical or wary of this model and to and elsewhere? And lastly, if you don't like those questions, feel free to just talk about whether this inspires you and what types of similar initiatives you'd see going forward. Technology and access to it expands across the Pacific region. So we'll now move into the table format. This is all for discussion, so don't be shy. Again, microphones and cameras on so you can see others at your table. I'll see you guys at the tables. Woo, welcome back, guys. I'm hoping that you guys all had some great discussions. Let's bring the panelists up to the stage, and we're just going to do a recap of what the key points were that came up in your table discussions. And after that, we'll move to answering some of the questions in the audience Q&A. I was jumping all over the table, so I heard a lot of interesting things. But let's start with you, Hannah. What were some of the key questions and topics you discussed that stood out?
I think for us on our table, a lot of discussions were around the challenges we faced and how we overcome most of those challenges and what we're doing now, what phases we are in the program. That was most of the questions that were, that was most of the discussion around our table. And around policies, around key decision makers, around data collection as well, was also brought up in our discussion and how we manage all of that.
Kendra, over to you. What were some of the standout points that you picked up on in these table discussions?
Thanks, Sandra. So I think initially we had some tech difficulties, so the discussion was shorter than it could have been at our table, I think. But I think two of the main share points for me are one, that the idea of, the concept of blockchain and cryptocurrency they get confounded a lot. And while the two do go together, they're separate technologies. And I think because of the history of cryptocurrency in the Pacific and the currency, the hard currency and tax statuses of a lot of the Pacific Island nations mean that when those two get confounded, the policy environment for bringing blockchain technology to the development space gets locked up a bit. That's probably one of the issues that needs to be addressed. And the second thing we talked about was how experience with cryptocurrencies around the world, and I think a lot of us in this discussion have been watching El Salvador and what's happening there right now. It opened up a lot of possibilities, but particularly in these small island nations where access to the global digital media have been limited in a lot of spaces, it means that there's a lot of opportunity for potential scams and fraud. We kind of reiterated that point made in the earlier panel by Rhonda that, if it smells bad, it probably is bad, and that we have a responsibility as leaders in this sector to really call that out and help people make the right types of investment with their time and money.
Definitely. Thanks, Kendra. Tristan, how about you? Did you take some technological questions about Ethereum and sidechains and scalability and all that? Please share.
Yeah, we did. I guess it makes sense that we focused a little bit more on the technology side of things, talking about different blockchains, the pros and cons, proof of work, proof of stake, a lot of the discussions that are going on with Ethereum at the moment. We talked a little bit about, side chains and why, I guess, Unblock Cash decided to use that in the case of Vanuatu because of the low value payments. Also spoke a little bit similar to Kendra about, the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrencies and, what's going on in El Salvador. But yeah, it was much more focused on, I guess, the technology challenges that a lot of crypto companies and blockchains are having at the moment, which is, how do we scale, which is a good problem to have. But it is a challenge that everyone is trying to answer right now. How do we, I think Bitcoin can handle 7 transactions per second, Ethereum, 14 to 30, and they're all looking for solutions right now. How do we continue to scale? And that's been answered by a number of different tech solutions, as well as new blockchains. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge.
Thanks so much, Tristan. What came up when I was discussing on a table with George, which is directly related to that, is the fact that we, in the innovative space, in the technology space, we do have to start kind of like testing these outer limits in order to solve the problems, right? Many people didn't realize that the earth was round until they realized that the earth was not flat and nobody was going to fall off of the edge, right? So in the same way, the responsibility of civil society to introduce these solutions at the edge, on the outer margins, and to kind of like push the limits of what is possible in terms of speed, payments, and reach is also something that then contributes back to businesses like yours at Sempo, but that also contributes back to the blockchain space at large. Nikki, what types of discussions did you guys have? I'm sorry, the shuffle seemed to have interrupted something interesting.
That's okay. I'm going to touch on 3 points that were asked. One was it really that easy to launch and how long did it take? And I'm going to compliment here the background work that had been done by Oxfam already and by Sempo. Having had that pilot behind us meant that we were ready to go. So yeah, it kind of was that easy. And someone asked me how long it took. It took us, from the vendor point of view, a month and a half to register the first 204 vendors, and then we were rolling. So it didn't take a long time, but benefit and thanks to the work that SEMPO and Oxfam had done on the pilot before. So a little tip there to any country that is disaster prone, i.e. the whole Pacific. Get going and have a pilot, have it go while you're in reasonably good condition before you have a big disaster. There were some really good questions asked about the cards. So I just wanted to reiterate, and apologies, Tristan, if my language is very simplified. They were a plastic card with a QR code. They were not a bank card. They didn't have a chip or a strip. Card, meaning it could be quickly rolled out. So when it was sourced and shipped to the country, they were live, they were ready to go. We all in the Pacific know how long it takes to wait for your credit card to come and get activated, and we didn't have those issues. These were not credit cards, it was a QR code technology. And the last question was a good one too. It was around taboo. So if you let people buy whatever they want, how many of them are going to have parties and buy cigarettes and alcohol? Thank you, Kendra. That's what the card looks like. Good one. So while she shows the card, I'll carry on with the taboo question. We had a really good experience, and part of that good experience was, again, because the technology had some smart inbuilt human factors. So there was a button that a woman could press if she was being forced to sell alcohol to a group of guys. When she pressed that button, it fed back to Oxfam, this beneficiary is forcing me to sell alcohol. So it respected the type of real life gender situations that do happen. And it put in place a way for that to be managed. And to be honest, we had very, very few. It was amazing how the training with the beneficiaries and the vendors really worked. They understood the purpose of this was humanitarian support, and they didn't abuse the system really very much at all. It's a credit to the people we have in Vanuatu and the Pacific.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. Yeah, so on the cards, they have both the QR code and near field communication, which is that tap and pay technology. But again, they are not bank cards. They're more like gift cards, would probably be the closest thing that I'd compare it to in this case. And, you know, I think for me, one of the pieces of feedback going back to this question of phones and cards and the kind of the flexibility and the flow of money through the market that it facilitated, one of those pieces of feedback relates to a topic of discussion at my table, which was around women in business and particularly women in informal markets. So some of the feedback that we got from women who were beneficiaries receiving these cards was that it allowed them to safeguard their money in a way that was not possible otherwise, you know, or in cash, you know, or even in some cases in a joint bank account. And so in terms of household control over resources for women, it really was a game changer, you know, for some of those women. The market vendors that were enrolled in the program, and let's be honest, a lot of the other vendors enrolled in the program, including taxi drivers, banana boat, some community stores had quite low levels of digital literacy. And Nikki's team did a really great job, not just of training them on the program, but training them how to use their phones. But I do think that for informal markets especially, that type of lightweight, you can carry your transaction mechanism and your whole basically cash register in the form of a phone with you is extremely well adapted to the way people transact and interact at the microeconomic level, at the community level, in a way that I think is what allowed for this speed of micro spending in these markets, because usually what you pay for in those places costs less and sometimes costs so little that it doesn't make sense to have a bank card to be spending that way. There was also a great question around how does this type of initiative move into financial inclusion and access when it comes to microfinance. So if people are saying that they feel that the card makes the money safe, if vendors are saying that the use of a phone to accept payments with a running count of how much is being made and who paid you makes money easier, to receive from your customers in different places at once, then we do need to start to look to the nexus of moving from humanitarian into development outcomes. How can the same technology that we've used to put humanitarian assistance on cards and marketplace that can be created around those cards with those phones, how can we make sure that that type of infrastructure can serve as financial infrastructure to stay in place after a project is over, in the form of open banking, in the form of digital banking, in a way that's financially inclusive? And that is something that Emerging Impact works on. And if anybody in the audience wants to do some research, that is blockchain's whole area of work called decentralized finance, which really just goes a step beyond what we've done. But I think it's safe to say, in the same way that we did a pilot in Vanuatu and we're able to scale to response, now that we've done a pilot and response, all of the stakeholders on the panel, but including the government of Vanuatu, are now thinking about how this technology can be integrated to enhance financial access and inclusion. And that's what you get when you decide, let's not be afraid to try, let's just go. All right, well, let's move into questions from the participants in the chat. So we had a bunch of Q&A in the last session, and we've got about, let's say, 10, 15 minutes before we wrap up everything. The top question in the chat is really around practical challenges. And this is something that, as much as we've touched on it so far, I do want to ask each one of the panelists, what has been the #1 practical implementation challenge that you've experienced in the Unblocked Cash project as it has gone to scale? Hannah, shall we start with you? So from the Oxfam side, basically, what was the hardest thing to do practically?
Thanks, Sandra. I think from our side, the hardest thing for us to do as Oxfam was really getting people on board, right? So for Oxfam, because it was a disaster response program, it was a bit challenging for us to get the right partnership with, for example, the National Disaster Office. And that is a challenge that I can say now is softening because of all the transparency in the program, because of all the information that is being fed to the public, how much has been injected in different provinces. Now the National Disaster Office can sit and look at all this information and say, this is a good program. And they've actually started to want to approach us now instead of us trying to approach them every time. So it has been a challenge, but with the working methods we have put in place, it has actually become more of our, not Oxfam going there and trying to drive this into this new program to them, but they're actually seeing the impact through our partners, through those who we've reached and worked with, and they've started to think that this is a good system for early recovery. We're not trying to replace the current system, but how can they work with our partners together to put the system in place for early recovery? And I think working towards that has been very, very good with the team on the ground, with all the partners we have in all the respected areas that they work in, has been very positive for us to get this attention we needed. And to have it now is better, is still very good for us. So we're looking forward to work more closely with them now, and they are very key people for this program to continue in Vanuatu, this sort of response to continue, the digital response to continue. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Kendra, World Vision as the largest footprint across multiple communities, being the biggest implementing partner on Unblocked Cash. What's the #1 practical challenge you think for the World Vision teams that were engaged on the project?
I don't think that there was a whole lot of practical challenges for the teams. I think that they picked it up quickly and more broadly, one of the practical challenges of the program was that there wasn't enough donor funding to respond to everyone's needs. And so beneficiary selection, as much as I hate that word, was selection, that's probably better, was limited to those with the greatest sort of vulnerability and need. But development professional definitions of that often don't match communities' perceptions or definitions of that. And so individual participant selection was a very sort of tenuous discussion with each of the communities. And that was done first and foremost by Oxfam, and then World Vision is the implementing partner coming behind and sort of reinforcing that. And so there were some little challenges at a personal level to really work through between individuals. But I do think that that is the sort of benefit of civil society and long-term partners in the country, is that you do have that trust and that network. I think overall, challenges was familiarizing the technology with individuals, because the outreach of the technology in Vanuatu is low. Electrification here is low. Internet networks are low. But interestingly, mobile phone use is high. And so there was a really sort of ripe individual environment to be able to do this, but a really low trust quotient in terms of digital financial services. It's a heavy cash-based economy. And so, as the director of a national NGO, one of the things that I was really keen was for my team itself to get familiar with digital financial technology and to propagate that in the communities that we work with, because safety and security concerns, fraud concerns, et cetera, with these large wads of cash in order to do humanitarian and long-term development programming are rife. And this type of technology can really resolve a lot of those issues. And, we saw it work really well. And so we see the trust quotient going up, not just with the government, as Hannah mentioned, which is absolutely true. I concur with what she's saying, but also end users. And so that's really what, World Vision wants to do with other partners in Vanuatu, is to then take that technology further into everyday life, because it'll solve so many problems.
Awesome. Thanks. And I think, a lot of these challenges, before I move over to you, Tristan, are challenges that we as implementers and partners experience, but in a way, our experience of finding solutions to those challenges then makes the next use of unblocked cash or this type of delivery model easier, because those issues can be anticipated. So Tristan, I know as the person that was always calling up Sempo and being like, we've got a problem, what are we going to do about this? What did you guys see, as initially a small company engaging with Oxfam, as some of the practical challenges that came when you got the call saying the time is now, cyclone just hit, we're going to scale? What was that like for Sempo as a blockchain startup?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. Some of the challenges we faced were, scaling up as an organization and providing, the quality assurance that is expected by enterprises such as Oxfam. It's, definitely a different level of scale and reliability that is expected from like a pilot program that's going to innovation pilot to scaling to hundreds of thousands of transactions, tens of thousands of beneficiaries and a large number of vendors. When you're at a store and you've got your tap to pay card with 10,000 Batu on it and you're trying to buy your groceries for the week, it's extremely frustrating when things don't work. Even if it is just, the one time it doesn't work for the month or, that small component of time, but people have a very high expectation for uptime reliability. So for us as an organization was, a lot of time and investment into quality assurance and reliability and scalability. And that's an ongoing investment and, something we're working on as an organization to continue to improve upon. And, one of the things we did, as part of the work with Oxfam is going through SOC 2 compliance, which is, industry standard for, software service providers to provide, reliable software and, assurance that, your operational procedures, your technology procedures are in line with industry standards. Yeah.
Thanks, Tristan. For the audience, just as an interesting anecdote, at the beginning of each month, once people knew the system was working and that money would hit their card at the beginning of each month in the program, everybody would be lining up to spend immediately, now, at all the grocery stores, to the point where taxis would start lining up in front of stores because they knew people were shopping. And this is what created some of the reliability and scalability issues that Tristan was talking about. It's one thing when one person can't buy milk. It's another thing when 1,500 people, 2,000, 3,000 people are all trying to buy milk at the same time, and the merchants, the local vendors have long lines out the door, trying to make sure that things continue to move quickly, despite the fact that, in the end, everybody was able to get, what they wanted to buy. Nikki, do you want to talk about some of those challenges on the merchant side? So practically speaking, VBRC identified, trained, and built this massive network where people could spend these cards. What was the biggest practical challenge for you all in deploying the technology in that way?
Thanks, Sandra. Generally speaking, there weren't a lot of problems, but I'm going to tell a funny story as well. The best one and the one that tripped us up the hardest was around mobile phone networks and their capacity to deliver data where we needed it. So one of our very first trainings was in a rural village in a very affected area after the cyclone. And we had tested our technique and we'd tested our training the night before with the actual phones. It was tap here, enter your password, and off we go. So we have our first group of vendors in a room in a church hall. So this is an area like Kendra touched on. There's no electricity. We're in a concrete church hall and we've got these vendors in a very affected area. So they're feeling vulnerable. They have their phones and we say, just enter your password and we'll get started. We have these blank stares. Enter your password and we'll get started. And we have people walking around. Not one password in the whole room would be accepted. So we're a little bit like, what's going on here? Anyway, typical Vanuatu and typical Pacific, we ended up working out that the mobile phone network was not strong enough inside the concrete church. So we moved the whole training up the hill under a mango tree because it was also desperately hot. And so we had all the vendors standing under a mango tree, very Pacific. All of a sudden we had better mobile phone service and coverage and everyone's passwords went. So the rest of the training was conducted under a mango tree, which is probably where we should have started in the first place. The learning there was, although the system does work offline, when you are offline, there are troubles. It's not perfect when you don't, excuse me, when you don't have a mobile data service, you have troubles. And that was our main struggle. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink of water.
Thanks, Nikki. I think I was there for one of those where we had to go sit under the tree. I think I still have some pictures from that. But I think, on the flip side, it does speak to the need for device-based infrastructure, right? That you can actually move underneath the mango tree. If the internet is out at your bank branch, you're done. So Yeah, that was definitely interesting. And what I also found interesting, and for anybody who's seeking to test this technology in environments where there is intermittent connectivity, there is intermittent electricity in some cases. What I have found magical between staff, partners, communities, and vendors is that people in environments where services may be poor or intermittent have an enormous amount of patience. And the level of patience, grace, laughter, smiles that were consistent throughout the entire program, despite the fact that we were trying to deploy this cutting edge technology out in the bush, sometimes, was really what made it work. That we're not going to be better than the state of infrastructure nationally, at least not now. But what we can do is have people start understanding and thinking about how to use that infrastructure. So with that, we are 2 minutes to closing. I'm going to wrap up the session and maybe give a minute back to everybody. We do not have time to answer any other questions. But thank you so much to Hannah, Kendra, Tristan, and Nikki. Thank you so much to the audience for asking your questions at the roundtable. Definitely, if you'd like to be in touch with any of us, then do contact the Island Innovations team. Recommend to friends, family, and colleagues to listen to the recording of this session if you feel that it's useful. We love it when Pacific solutions get global adoption and global interest and global relevance, because that's not always the case, for the Pacific Islands. So thank you to everybody for joining, and I'll let you all get on with your days. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Kendra. Bye, everyone. Take care.